Justice for Noor and the topic that has been so-called trending and I don't know about you guys, but it's been haunting me seriously, and I've been receiving a lot of calls from some of our graduates, and I thought I bring things into certain perspective at least, so that we become a little bit more aware as a nation, and doing this all together. And see, nothing can compensate for what has really happened. And I think the amount of pain and the agony that the family's been, has gone through, the traumatization of, father having to see her child, in that format. I mean, it's something that's so disturbing that me and my family also haven't rested really well. And it's just something that's constantly playing over and over again. And, you know, now, I'm not a healthcare provider nor a professional, and some of the domains that I look after are yes related to mental illness, but in terms of complementary and alternative therapies. So I'm a coach, and I'm a trainer for coaching a lot of people on interventions that do help the sense of negative thinking, negative emotions, inner conflicts, and limiting beliefs. And we're basically working with individuals in terms of having them to create the sense of empowerment that they need in life. And I think still we do play a very significant role in terms of addressing the issue that's been going on. And from whatever I can, I mean, I'm not a psychologist, neither a psychiatrist, neither a trained healthcare provider, but I am a reader. I love studying. I love reading. I love understanding things into perspective. And I thought I just, take down notes. I've been working around it and thought if you could put things, together. Now, this culprit, who did this, sense of, horrendous act that was performed, should be punished, to the highest extent. And I really, look forward for authorities to taking measures to getting justice for Noor. You see, you have most of the psychologists and psychiatrists resort to DSM-5, and those of you who don't know it, it's about in a sense, like for example, it's kind of like a statistical diagnostic and statistical manual for mental disorders. And three words are rapidly coming up if you've encountered them. It's like, for example, one is psychopathic or sociopathic, and schizophrenia and narcissist. And will they be termed did this guy get away with these mental illness label and then be able to be free? I wanted to just see if you could put things into perspective. In the manual of DCM-5, and if we did even open up, there isn't any diagnostic tool for labeling individuals as like psychopath or sociopath, but yet it does fall under the categorization of ASPD, which is antisocial personality disorder, and that's diagnostics is yes available for that. And both psychopath and sociopath, psychopathy and they both fall under the same grid. So what is a psychopath? A technical person, anybody who has inaccurate sense of self-image, somebody who lacks empathy, somebody who's pathological personality traits, like for example having no moral compass, or they may tend to seem to have a lot of attention seeking behaviors. Now, yeah, technically, for sure, every psychopath is a narcissistic, personality traits, and for most common, but yes, not every narcissistic, person is more likely a psychopath or a sociopath. So that's the major difference between sense of both. And narcissistic people do feel a high sense of amount of guilt, shame, and maybe more shame because it's a public emotion. And narcissistic people would still have that certain component working for them. And but that doesn't really go in the sense of somebody who's a psychopath. It doesn't work that way. These people don't experience this sense of guilt, shame, or any remorse in that context. um, Most likely a psychopath would be somebody who's born, and again I would use the word most likely, but in most cases it is that, And whereas sociopath, the major difference is that they're created by sense of society. Now, there was a interview out on YouTube about some friend belonging to the family, and claimed that the guy had a approximate sense of what you call sociopathic behavior, because he had a lot of friends who bullied him and was really a loner or anything. Yet it doesn't give a license to the society to not hold them towards justice, and that's not an excuse for that. Now, for sure, they're most of my students, because they know some sense that we do teach about them, they psychopaths do have a different set of autonomous nervous system. Their autonomous nervous system acts a little bit differently, because when it activates, it goes into our sympathetic mode, and most of my students do know what sympathetic nervous system is, which is like the fight and flight response. And usually for normal individuals like you and me and any other people in the society, when they do something wrong, they have this adrenaline rush, and which is not the same way as psychopaths work, and they don't really feel any remorse for it, and that's how they get away even with lie detectors. Now, why am I sharing this with you? Try to understand this. This is a perspective. The discussion has been going around. The mental health care providers should have brought this to notice. It's These people can bypass a lie detector. I mean, what are you really holding accountable? I mean, it's just basically saying that some doctor graduated from university and was an MBBS doctor, and committed suicide, and then that's to be blamed on the institution from where he graduated. That's not really true. I mean, there are many doctors who have committed wrongdoings, ill doings, and wrong practices. This is not the discussion about the institution that they've graduated from, or the institution where they were really serving at. And sure, I'm going to come to that point as well, but this is about justice. This is about somebody who's done a grave sense of sin, and it has to be put behind bars because this guy is and maybe also punished in accordance to the law of what basically it means to murder somebody that brutally, and you know with that thought process. And most of these diagnostics, you're talking about all these psychologists and individuals, psychotherapists. Well, they have to, for somebody to be diagnosed as a psychopath, they should have demonstrated those behaviors before the age of 15. In terms of PTSD, it's about 18, because they go through an A score. Now, there are testing mechanisms, yet how many these people are commonly living amongst us, and it's not really easy to understand those traits and bring them up. And yet I will discuss certain patterns to it, and where we should really hold people accountable. And for sure, and how could mental health care professionals be also held more accountable in this text. So think about this. People who are psychopathic, or they don't have a sense of conscience. And that's why we teach our graduates about ecology, which is the science of consequences. Most probably when you're working with a client, what you're really wanting to test is and check is that as soon as they enter your premises, if you're certifying them, if you're graduating them as a coach, you should first evaluate them on the science of consciousness, or and or consequences rather, sorry. So you got to understand, if they're not in sense of any danger to themselves, which is self to self, are they really harming themselves? You got to really understand. If they are, that's not a coach's perspective. We do recommend them to psychological assessments. And if they're in terms of basically harming others, what is the severity of it? What are the consequences of that? And then we address them towards the right, we point them to the right direction. So we got to be really careful about the ecology of the clients that we take on. And that's why I hammer that for about a full day, where we're talking about the beliefs of a coach. What are the beliefs of a mental health care provider, or providing even in terms of complementary or alternative therapies. What are the belief systems? What are the ecological levels, 4 levels of ecology? And those are great barometers, and for them to develop that sense of sensory acuity to be able to detect those patterns is again a very important sense. Now, others, where they basically claim is that, well, okay, fine, I mean, maybe this is not a case scenario of psychosis or psycho, this is not a behavior that is psychopathic or sociopathic, and or something, this is schizophrenic. And now, what does the word schizophrenia, like mean? Schizo, if you kind of like divide this word, schizo means the mind, and phrenia is, sorry, schizo is like basically the split, and what phrenia is the mind. So it's kind of like split of the mind, but it's not like something that is split personality. It's not like that. It's a syndrome. And some of the attributes in that context are some things that basically come up in terms of hallucinations, delusions, and then there are a few more benchmarks. But hallucination, delusion, would be the one of the number one benchmarks that they would want to basically see in these sense of diagnostics. And that's not related to substance abuse. And if you review this entire case scenario, things have come up where the this guy, this dude, he's on substance abuse. So why are you even, camouflaging them in the context of a mental health, arena, when when it's clearly he was into influence of drugs, and that is for sure punishable by law, and the law should see that in sense of accord. So this is not about the context of his mental condition. And these people, are some, if you see most of the documentaries on YouTube, you have access to abundance of light. You don't have to be a psychologist to understand this as a very basic sense of framework, that there are people who are amongst us in society who do wrong stuff, and half of them are not caught. They get away with it. And this is not about this. What it really is about, getting a justice to a father who's, a family who's lost a daughter and who was brutally murdered. And murder is a murder. And that's how it basically, should be seen in that sense of context. And I really pray, and the entire family, and I'm pretty sure the entire nation is praying along, in terms of hoping that people like Noor and many others do get their sense of justice. Now, while I say this, there is, yes, a lack and significant negligence on the part of certain institutions and certain individuals who could make these things better. You see, one of the things that I tell my graduates, that even when you're hiring a coach, here are a few attributes that you should really look into. You see, when you go to a doctor, when you're sick, when you go to a doctor, and you don't just go to any doctor. You go to a doctor that is well taught, well received in the society. They have referrals, and that's how you choose a doctor. And in terms of a mental health care professional, or people who are related to the alternative or complementary therapies, or even in terms of coaching, what would be really necessary? Think about this for a moment. I mean, if any client came to me for any sense of coaching, I would first see, does this fall under my purview or not? And if it doesn't, I would recommend them to a psychologist or a psychotherapist or a psychiatrist, or wherever it deems, medically fit for them to be referred to. So, or sometimes when healthcare providers contact us for complementary and alternative, provision of therapy, they refer us, and that's a medical referral to a coach, which is working alongside with a healthcare professional. But should any client come to me, what are the few things that I would really want you guys as a society to be aware of? And that's basically, question your interventionist, question your therapist. These are some things that you should know about them. For example, if you ever came up to Arsan Larik and you said that, Arsan, we would require coaching from you, before even you do that, check credentials. And credentials is really important. You have all the authority to go and check into the American Board of Neurolinguistic Programming and to confirm, is this person an authentic trainer? Is this person an authentic coach? Or, a person who can practice complementary and alternative, therapies, like such as coaching, timeline therapy techniques, hypnotherapy, or for that matter, even coaching itself. It's good to always check credentials. It just builds more credibility. And you as a society, and as members of the community, have the full authority to do so. Number two, now this is also something that you should take into account when you're meeting people who are coaches and who are professionals. You have all the rights to ask them about how many hours of therapy and training are they taking for themselves. consistently ongoing, not at the time while they're doing their course scenario. Now, of course, while you're studying, you are of course going through a lot of hours of interventions and therapies, but what happens after those studies? For example, I had to once visit a psychologist, and I asked my psychologist, how many therapy sessions have you taken for yourself? And the person admitted that, well, they ever since they graduated from the university, they did, their 2 years of practice, they got their license, and then they didn't really require therapy. I would run away from that person. I mean, imagine if you're, we know about the average of five people, right? So if you're with, five billionaires, you would be half a millionaire, at least bare minimum. If you're with five drug addicts, you'll be half a drug addict. You're telling me that you're looking after five clients who are depressed and you're not depressed, well, clinically, you're basically working with individuals who are going through mental health challenges. I think learning is an ongoing journey, and it's really authentic, and it's your bona fide right to know about how many hours of therapy are they taking for themselves. And you can always cross check, cross confirm if that's valid and that's true. And those are the type of, professionals that you should be basically seeking after for help. Other than these two, the third, areas that basically you would also want to confirm in your credential, their referrals. So, for example, you would want to ask a few people, well, what's the standing of this person? Have they really created those results? And that's how you choose the right person, individual to work with and to collaborate with. But this is, again, a different perspective. When you saw this case scenario is like, for example, a girl in the house just screaming, and people are there in the house and they're not doing anything, kind of supposes. And there's a beautiful supposition. I mean, not I'm saying in the sense of a beautiful, but I'm saying it's a perfect sense of a presupposition to, at least, even the dumbest of us could really understand that this is something that's not happened for the first time. It's not the institution, it's not the, bache ne kahan se, where the child has studied from, where they've done their A and O levels, what happened in their childhood. That's nothing of concern. The concern is that the parents may have seen these sense of evident patterns, and if the family knows these, patterns, they should have reported it. um, we are unfortunate in Pakistan that we don't have an infrastructure that governs, the, mental health domain at large. And of course, if somebody is diagnosed, then if somebody's richy rich, they would basically pay for these really fancy rehabilitation centers. How long do you think these rehabilitation centers would, keep a person? They'll just see, as long as, the person is not harming themselves, as long as they're not harming others and they're no harm to the society, they will sign a discharge. And after that, it's just in the family. For example, there are people who really can't afford, health, and they have insurance companies. They would also want to save their buck if they understand the client is, perfectly okay in the state of mind that they could go back home, so they'll sign that discharge. But and if the family feels that their, safety of themselves is at risk, or the sense, safety of the client is at risk, or safety, of them towards the society is at stake, they should have reported this in advance. A life could have been saved in that context. I, with all these, discussions that are happening around, I hope we take on our sense of responsibility. If you, really care about somebody, you should, these patterns are evident. If you see something that is not in accordance to a normality, or where you feel that there's a signs of consequences being violated in terms of ecological levels, this has to be reported and taken care of. If the parents had taken little responsibility, this thing could have been saved. This is not a context of, where the, child was studying, what the child was doing. It's about parents and their discipline with the people that were there in the surrounding that could have really initiated. They somehow fallen as being in a, as in kind of like supporting what really actually happened on that day. And they too should be punished in sense of in accordance of law too. This is not about one person. This seems to be a, completely a sense of a entire family being involved. And I really hope and pray that, Noor and her family do get that sense of justice, which is still a very big dilemma when it comes to people who are very politically highly influential and they have a lot of money. But the least we can do is take a lot of sense of personal responsibility and at least voice what basically is wrong, and what really shouldn't have been there and what shouldn't have been done. um, Hope this finds you guys in accord and you guys can understand the gravity of situation. People would want to take this discussion to every single direction, by diverting the conversation as to what the girl was doing there initially. Well, that's none of your business. I mean, a girl was killed, a murder took place. This is about somebody's life that went away, which could have been saved. This is not a context of diverting them to where the child studied at, what were the child's credentials, is he mentally sane. No, well, of course there's sense of sanity. These were statements that were given, everything was assessed. This is about a person who's committed a crime and should be punished for it, period. I mean, I think there's nothing less or more to this. And I hope you guys can really voice this out, and hope the family does deserve the due justice that is required.